Tonight, a judge agreed to release documents where Bill Cosby admitted to drugging women before having sex with them. But the reason he gave for releasing that sealed document is raising a whole bunch of legal eyebrows. Our panel of attorneys, they'll debate whether the judge did the right thing or he overstepped. Then, a controversial Supreme Court case that could change college admissions forever. High Court's going to rule whether the color of a student's skin should impact their application. Parents and students everywhere, they're going to be watching this one. Also, this FSU quarterback was booted from the team. I'm not talking about Jameis Winston. And he was arrested after he was caught on tape punching this woman. His lawyer says she hit him first and provoked him. Question is, does it matter? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And tonight, we're going to start with Bill Cosby. By now, you've probably heard that newly released court documents showing Cosby admitted under oath to giving women drugs before having sex with them. Now, the dozens of accusers all have similar stories. Here, just a few of them.
I took a couple of sips of the cappuccino, and from the first sip and then the second sip, I knew I had been drugged.
Mr. Cosby brought me a drink, and that was my last clear memory.
I knew something was just going to be bad, and
what happened after you finished your drink?
I felt woozy, and he told me to come into the bedroom.
Now, many people, they're questioning the reasons the judge gave for releasing the deposition statements. He released them because the Associated Press petitioned the court. Now, here's a part of the judge's statement explaining his rationale. Quote, "It's not about Cosby's status as a public person by virtue of the exercise of his trade as a televised or comedic personality. Rather, defendant has donned the mantle of public moralist and mounted the proverbial electronic or print soapbox to volunteer his views. So, Cosby's moralizing and preaching for family values and other issues led to this, according to the judge." And I want to bring our panel in as to whether or not the judge overreached here or made a courageous ruling. All right, let's get our panel to weigh in. Doug Van Oys is a founding partner of Carson Van Oys, focusing on corporate misconduct, and selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the nation. And Mayo Bartlett. He's an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Jimmy Kasuris, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors at the New York Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. And we want to welcome a new face to our program, Amy Dardastian. She's an attorney and a legal analyst and an Emmy Award-winning journalist. So when you guys yell at me about the media, you're going to have to yell at her too. All right.
We'd rather yell at you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Jimmy, I start with you here. Listen, I think this is certainly critical to the case. We'll talk about how it may change or not change some of the cases or some of the suits that have been brought against Cosby and statute of limitations and all that stuff in a second. But the judge's ruling, I'm sure you've had cases before where there's been a sealed document and an agreement. This gets unsealed, and his rationale is this guy lectures people about marriages, family values, and the rest, so that should make this thing open for public purview. Did the judge get it right?
Well, I think he did, because first of all, this is something that occurred at a deposition, and he made it very clear, and it's the law, that there is no presumption in favor of sealing or unsealing either way, number one. Number two, his public moralizing and putting himself out there as a public figure in that specific way was a legal ground to do so. But he also had a second ground that we didn't comment on, and that is that he's responded to these allegations. And so there's a certain extent to which he's waived his right to privacy by doing so. He's being sued, he's made statements himself publicly through his lawyers, and so any right to privacy, as minimal as it might have been in deposition testimony, was overridden. So I don't think it's a wrong decision.
So
I'm going to have to disagree
with
Jimmy.
To me, that if he just said no comment, and he never gave any comments about the breakdown of the African-American families and the rest, then the judge would have said it stays sealed?
I think this is a contract issue where the parties came to an agreement on a settlement. They have the right to contract the terms of that settlement. And often what you'll see, and what was probably done in this case, is that money was given by Bill Cosby in exchange for this lady to keep it quiet. And the parties have every right to agree to that. Now, that being said, I was disappointed that the state of Pennsylvania didn't bring a criminal action, even if this lady wouldn't have testified because she agreed to be quiet. Had they brought a criminal action, because it can't be precluded by a civil settlement, maybe more people would have come forward
Well,
sooner.
that gets to the second part, Amy. But do you agree, Mayo, that the judge, even though, listen, I think this might help a lot of people in their cases and stuff, at the same time, did Cosby and his counsel have a reasonable expectation that when they left that case in 2005, that what was said in the depot and what was said, that stuff was going to stay sealed?
Well, they left that case in 2005. There's no determination on the merits in that case, first of all, and Amy's 100% correct. If you start doing this, there's a chilling effect on every civil suit that exists in the United States, because someone will turn around and say, because you exercise your First Amendment right and we disagree with you, we're going to unseal and breach the benefit of the contract.
But there was no contract in this case.
Well,
And
there is,
Amy,
because
that's
when
where
you-
I disagree. There was no contract. There was a temporary order of sealing pending the resolution, and I'm pretty sure, my understanding is there was no contract, there was no agreement, there was no order as to a permanent sealing. This was kind of left out there. It was not addressed.
Was the matter
But wait a
ever
second,
actually
Doug,
resolved? is the
you're
question.
involved in civil suits all the time. I can just imagine, when you see what happened, you say, time out here. I'm bringing a suit against somebody. If I found out that this guy 10 years ago admitted to the same kind of misbehavior, and in a deposition he testified under oath that he did the same behavior he's claiming never have done before, that's going to be relevant to my case. You've been on both sides of this. You've been on the prosecution side, and now obviously you're representing defendants. Where do you fall?
I agree with Jimmy. This is very unusual because you have the exact same allegations. You have a federal court judge who's listening to it, where this guy is saying in public that he's denying this. And you got to remember this, you have sworn testimony. This guy went into a deposition, he raised his right hand, he swore to the truth.
But that's not the reason the judge gave, though, for why he unsealed it.
The judge, I've been before that judge before, very good judge, federal court judge. The reasoning that he gives, people could disagree with. But the fact of the matter is, you have a person who has sworn testimony, who's taking a different position in potentially criminal, definitely maybe civil cases. He has the right to let that.
If that's the case, then what you should do is bring a perjury charge. You don't unseal it, you don't go forward that way. And if you show that there is sworn testimony that's false, or that materially contradicts current testimony, that's the remedy. It's not to unseal a sealed document
But it
that's
was
in a previous
temporarily
case.
sealed, which is normal in civil cases. We're negotiating a settlement. There's a temporary sealing. There was no contract for permanent sealing.
Was there a settlement in the case?
There was a settlement.
If there's a settlement in the case, the parties are going to infer, at least at a minimum, that that contract is there for any release. And Doug, you do lots of civil cases. Every time you sign a release, that means that most of the time your clients are precluded from discussing the merits of the case, the facts of the case.
But if there was such an agreement, I think the court would have taken it into consideration, because then I agree with Amy entirely. If there is truly a contractual issue and it's raised, which it didn't seem to have been raised here, Cosby's opposition was, don't release it because it's going to cause me embarrassment and harm. He didn't come forward and say, wait a minute.
Before I
we
run
still
out
have
of time on this one, guys, here's my next thing. And again, I'm the non-attorney at the table, but I think most of the audience has the same question. Why is this released now when 10 years ago this was on the table? It took the Associated Press to push the issue.
Well, they
We're
waited
now
for the
relying
allegations.
on a FOIA request to get to the bottom of something that would have materially changed people's lives, and with statute of limitations could have changed outcomes of other cases. The timing of this, again, if you're sitting outside of you hollowed barrister's world, it says, wait a minute, why now? If you're going to put it out at all, why not put it out when people's cases weren't under that 10-year window that have now closed?
Because they just came forward.
But as Doug
But
said,
it took the journalist to push them to release the documents. That doesn't seem like
there have
justice.
been people coming forward for decades, and the other thing is that, to Doug's point, if you have such a great federal judge, then that person doesn't give this type of reasoning. That person would give some reasoning that makes sense to the rest of us, and you'd sit there and you'd have some articulable reason. There'd be some justifiable cause for unsealing. And simply because he exercises his free speech is not that cause.
Okay, Amy, how could this change the case is going forward against Cosby, now that it's out there?
Right. Well, I mean, he has a variety of accusers, and they're across many states, from New Orleans to Toronto. So you have different statute of limitations depending on which state, and there are different tolling provisions. Most of the statute of limitations have run, except for there's an investigation now in Los Angeles where that may fall within the statute of limitations because the person's accusing him of raping her in 2008.
Now,
But what
specifically he said, and tell me how this would work into the cases, he procured Quaaludes, a sedative, with the intent of giving it to the women to have sex. He didn't say that he intentionally drugged them and then that led to something else. So can you extrapolate time out? Now we've got pattern?
Well, first of all, there's a lack of physical evidence if these women didn't immediately go to the hospital and preserve that physical evidence, which is rarely done in these cases because there's a stigma, there's people who are ashamed,
Right.
they're traumatized, they
it's
repress
Bill
what
Cosby,
happened.
who'd believe you,
right,
right.
but what I would do in this circumstance, I would take this case to federal court and try to build a case by aggregating all of the claims and claim that he's a serial rapist. And then what I would do to get jurisdiction in federal court is I would say that these statutes of limitations that preclude all of these claims are a violation of the constitutional right to due process.
I hear you
Well,
grumbling.
many states,
He
though,
is
you can make that
factually
same.
sunk. Amy's right. If you can find a way to have these cases litigated on the facts, this is very powerful. Very powerful. This is corroborative where there is no corroboration.
The problem you're going to have, though, is you can argue that with any criminal case. You can say that due process is denied because any statute of limitations exists. The other issue is that in many states, certainly in New York, you don't have a statute of limitations for rape. So there is no statute of limitations. If you can prove that that occurred or you have a reasonable cause to believe that a rape occurred, you go forward.
That's
Beyond his
true.
public persona and the fact that if you follow this, in the last weeks, from statues to coming down to whatever remnants of a show being pulled and all the rest that's gone along with it, and whatever slivers of support he had in certain communities seemingly have disappeared, Doug, from a legal exposure standpoint, is it really just his name that's been permanently harmed here, or could he actually conceivably see the inside of a cell?
Well, Amy said, you have to look at the statutes and state to state. If there's no statute to prosecute him under, no, he doesn't go inside a cell. But maybe to a guy his age, and maybe it's his reputation that he's thinking about, that could be the biggest punishment.
That's why if you can bring it to federal court, there is no statute on sexual abuse. There isn't one in New York, but there used to be, and the statute that was in existence at the time the crime took place is what applies. So anything before 2006 would be subject to the 5-year New York statute.
And for any of our younger viewers who don't know this, just taking it out of legal world for a second, Bill Cosby, from the days of Fat Albert to I Spy to the Cosby Show, he was America's dad. Forget all the barriers he broke down and everything else. If there was a more trustworthy face, NBC made billions off of this man here. The idea that there was such a secret dark side, evil side to this person, it's still hard to wrap your arms around.
Although, Richard, you look at anybody who's whether you have a public persona or you don't, there's good and then there's the side that's not so great that people aren't so proud of. And we tend to deify people in the media. We tend to say, well, this guy's got a great
Mayo,
show.
this
He's
is
done a
different
lot of
than-
really good
this
things.
is different than a person with feet of clay.
No, it is,
This
but-
is evil.
but at the same
if
time-
he's guilty of what he's accused
But you see it in public figures, you see it in elected officials, you see it
This
in beloved
bad, though?
presidents until they
Oh.
release the tapes and you hear what they were really saying. And you,
But
it doesn't.
Mayo, though, if you look at the women and the credible women that are coming forward with a lot to lose by coming forward too, it's unbelievable how systemic this was, how predatory this was.
Serial.
But
I
Rich,
mean,
Serial rape.
It's really wrong.
we were talking about the judge's opinion before. What you just said is exactly what the judge just said. And until you actually saw the sworn words of Cosby admitting that he was doing these things that these women were saying, you gave the guy the benefit of the doubt
Always.
to that point.
I want to know who counseled him to possibly ever say that at
Yeah.
a deposition. Who says that?
Must have
Where did
evidence.
that
The
come
lawyer
from?
stepped in, he was too late.
Yeah. He was really slow. He's not running to 40, that guy, in 8 seconds. All right. We want you, as always, to get involved in our conversation. Head over to Facebook and Twitter and answer our question. Should Bill Cosby be prosecuted even though the alleged crimes happened decades ago? And so, we're going to get to some of your previous comments from prior shows a little bit later on in the program as well. All right, coming up next, we switch gears. Imagine if your kid had better grades than other kids but didn't get into the college of his or her choice just because of the color of his or her skin. Well, that is going to be the next big issue the Supreme Court will decide in its next session. It's a case that will have a huge impact. We'll debate that after this.